We are delighted to be with you this week. It's Earth Week. It's the historic 50th anniversary. We celebrated Earth Day on Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020, a few days ago. And I want to tell you just a little bit before we get started about Global Minded. Global Minded is dedicated to creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, and all manner of diversity into the education, employment, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. We do that through a number of programs, First Generation Leadership Program, Teens and Technology Program for low-income teenagers, and we connect people to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs so that they can get to financial freedom. And we are delighted to work with our partners this week. We are working with the World Academy for Arts and Sciences and the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And also locally, Global Minded is based out of Denver, but works nationally and globally with the Alliance Center that is Denver-based. So today we are fortunate to have guests from a number of different cities and time zones throughout the United States. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Deborah Kelly. She represents employers in all different areas of high tech and financial services. And she has been a very strong supporter and advocate for the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And she and Rick Parnell, who you heard from and you'll hear from again today, have worked together for a number of decades when Rick was leading the United Nations Foundation. So we're delighted to have you here, Deborah, and we have incredible people representing millions and billions of young people around the world, and we're very much looking forward to today's session to end this incredible week. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Carol. It's really an honor to be able to participate in this very important week and bring attention to this issue. So let me introduce our co-panelists. So we are joined today, we are all around the United States, so I would say good morning to everyone and good very, very early morning to Erica Dodds, we'll start out with, who is in the Bay Area and is the COO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And then we have Ashley Meeke, who is in Chicago, who is a youth leader and is a graduating senior from high school. In Baltimore, we have Jesse Plank, presently sequestered elsewhere, but he is the president of the senior class at McDonough and another youth leader, and that is what today's program really focuses on. In the non-youth category, we have Rick, who is the CEO of this organization, and we have me, the also non-youth category persons. But we are, in setting this up today, we want to make clear this is not about speeches. No one has given canned remarks. We really want this to be a conversation so that the people on the panel can bounce ideas off of each other, and so that those of you who are participating through the webinar can type in your questions, which I can then direct toward the relevant person. So what I want to start out with is to first go to the person who's making this happen, Rick Parnell, who is the CEO of this organization. And Rick, when people think about Earth Week and people think about the environment, I think we think, oh, okay, I'm paying attention to it. I know there's this thing out there called global warming. I'm not sure what it is, but what is climate restoration? Could you explain that?
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to the person who really put all this together, to Carol and her team at Global Minded. So thank you so much. This has been an incredible week. I spoke with the president of Earth Day Network yesterday, and she's just thrilled with how this week has turned out, and that so many people are really committed to the environment and to climate, and increasingly to climate restoration. So let me just say briefly, some of you may have heard this from me before, but I worked for almost 2 decades at the United Nations Foundation, and so I worked very closely with Senator Worth and others around climate. And you know, I was in Paris, and lots of different conversations and negotiations around net zero, 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, mitigation, adaptation. When I retired from the UN Foundation a couple of years ago, I was at a conference, Forbes Summit, and I was approached by the Foundation for Climate Restoration's founder, Peter Frykowski, and he said, I really want to talk to you about climate restoration. And I had the reaction that a lot of people have immediately of, what do you mean restoration? We have to work hard to mitigate and adapt. And he said, but Rick, people are not talking about the fact that there is 1,000 years worth of carbon. If you think about it, for the last 2 centuries, we've been putting excess carbon into the atmosphere, and it'll take 1,000 years left to natural solutions for that carbon to be removed, if at all. So we have to not only adapt and mitigate, but we also have to remove the legacy carbon that's in the atmosphere. For us, most simply put, is that we would like to work hard with all of our different partners to return the atmosphere to the pre-industrial level of 300 parts per million. I won't get technical, I promise. But again, thinking about the 2 centuries of carbon that's been put up into the atmosphere, all the mitigation adaptation, critically important, it will still be there. So let me just, if I could, Erica, could I just show this? Some of you may have seen this. We'll just do a little 25 seconds of a video that we love. So if you think about it in the simplest terms, the Earth has been you see the water line, the Earth has been in a healthy state of carbon for thousands of years. And 2 centuries ago, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, we started filling the tub with carbon. And for the last 2 centuries, the tub has been filled and filled and filled. Now, mitigation adaptation is to work with the tub as it's full, but to mitigate it is net zero that you've heard about, turning off the faucet. But even when we turn off the faucet by 2050, all of the carbon will still be there. And so, as you can see from the illustration, the drain, as we call it, our goal is over the next 30 years to remove all of the excess carbon and get us back to the pre-industrial state. It's very, very straightforward. It's unbelievably aggressive and complicated, but absolutely doable. We have the technology, we have the solutions. So for us, it is how to remove the carbon in both technological and natural solutions to get us back down to 300 parts per million. You're muted, Kelly. Kelly, you're muted.
It's a good thing for a moderator to unmute herself so that she can be heard. And now we're back. That's a great explanation of restoration, which I think for a lot of listeners is a topic that we're not familiar with, and we'll learn a lot more about it in this hour. But now we want to turn to the stars of the show, which are the youth leaders, Jesse, Carol, and Erica. Yes, you are also youth, although you're already a COO of this organization. So I want to start with Ashley, and I'm going to ask each of you, what brought you to be interested in this issue?
Yeah, what brought me to be interested in this issue was that last year I was invited to the 2019 Global Climate Restoration Forum at the UN headquarters. And that's when I was introduced to restoration for the first time. Of course, I had heard about adaptation and I've heard about mitigation, but that was the first time that I really had hope for my future because there's that restoration component that I had never heard about.
Okay, how about you, Jesse?
Yeah, a couple years ago, I guess besides just hearing it regularly on the news or in other ways that is publicized, a couple years ago I watched this really, moving spoken word performance from a spoken word artist called Prince E.A., who used this analogy about putting Earth's life into 24 hours, and we as humans have only been around for 3 seconds based on that analogy. And in those 3 seconds, we've still created all these detrimental causes to the Earth and the environment. And that's what really sort of, I guess, was the first sort of step for me to see this as an issue that I wanted to take part in, that I wanted to become passionate about. And then over time, just inherently because of the issue that it is, the type of issue, it just kept coming up in my life until it just, I don't know, it inevitably just continued coming up in my life. So I started to join the cause.
That's a great answer. I'm going to dovetail back on that after I get Erica to say what brought you to this issue as well.
Thanks. Yeah. Up until very recently, I avoided thinking about the climate like the plague because it just seemed like such a huge, impossible issue that I just didn't want to deal with it. I figured there were smart people who were working on it. Someone was going to figure it out. And if they didn't, there wasn't really anything I could do about it anyways. So I was really focused on literally anything else. And then I had this conversation with our founder where he said that none of our climate work right now is focused on generating an outcome that we want. So right now we've been looking at the climate like it's this huge complex system. There are certain levers that we can pull that'll, incrementally change the path that we're on. But we haven't actually looked at where we want that path to end. And so he had come up with this goal of climate restoration, that we should really target an outcome where we can ensure the survival of humanity and the natural world around us. And the idea that you could come up with like a positive outcome for the climate was a really new idea to me. And then the idea that you could actually take out the harmful greenhouse gases, take out the CO2 from the atmosphere was really mind-blowing. So once I understood those things, I really couldn't get away from it.
So you've all made compelling cases for what first brought you to pay attention to this issue. But there's a lot going on in the world. We don't have to say much more about the fact that we're in quarantine, most of the various cities we're in today. And there's many issues to attend to when you think about how can I make the world a better place. So this is for Jesse and Ashley. I'll start with Ashley. Of all the issues out there that you could work on, how did you select climate to be your first goal?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about climate because ultimately I want to be an international businesswoman, and I really want to head into the field of climate restoration and do my part there. But also I want to travel the world, and it would absolutely break my heart to see the earth in a poor condition. And I believe that everyone should have the opportunity to see the earth's beauty. So that's what really brought my attention and my awareness and my deep care about the earth.
How about you, Jesse, of all the issues to focus on, why this one?
I mean, for starters, especially as somebody who's growing up into this world, there's an element of, I guess, how could I not get involved with this issue? Because it will inevitably and undoubtedly affect my future in a bunch of different ways in many aspects of my life, depending on where I live, the job that I take, what foods I eat. Different aspects of my life will change as I grow up into this planet, into this world. And so I wanted to, not just sit around and fall into the trap of, oh, somebody else is working on that, or, oh, what could I possibly do? But, actually take action and be part of the movement that's helping, cure this disease in a sense. In terms of restoration specifically, this is a relatively new idea that I'm able to explore, especially because for the most part on TV, we see, the aspects of mitigation and adaptation are the main publicized things that people are fighting in terms of climate change. But it's an interesting concept to say, hey, we can still get to that point. We are net zero as a world, as a community, as a planet, but we're still left with upwards of 400 parts per million atmospheric CO2. We're still left with way too much atmospheric CO2 in our atmosphere. And so there is an aspect to it where we need to also understand that to get to a point where we want to have a healthy planet and a healthy world, we need to start doing other forms of curing this disease, or other forms of antidoting this problem, this issue. And through climate restoration specifically, I think that's a great way to go about it, to reach that point and get below the 400 parts per million, back down to the pre-industrial data points.
So all three of you have clearly stated why it matters right now. Do your friends, do your classmates, do your neighbors, do your age cohorts share this view about how important is climate change? Let me ask you that first, and then depending upon your answer, ask you what do you do about it. Well, I'll kick off with you again, Ashley.
My friends, unfortunately, are kind of pessimistic about the topic of like the global warming because, of course, they still know about adaptation and mitigation, but as a whole, my generation, I feel like, haven't really heard about restoration. And so because of that, they are like pessimistic, and they don't really necessarily care about the environment because they feel like it's, again, too large of an issue to overcome, and they feel like they may not have any significant impacts in order to help climate restoration.
What about you, Jess?
For the most part, the friends in my community, it's a mix of yes and no in terms of thinking about this as an important issue. The people who I'm surrounded with, for the most part, are all fully on board with this issue, especially being a part of the group that I'm a part of at my school. But then for the most part, what I've seen, there hasn't necessarily been opposition to this issue or anything that's, they take affirmative action against this crisis. It's more people are indifferent about it, or they actually aren't educated about it. They haven't started that discussion with the people around them to gain an understanding of this issue and how important it is to everybody in the entire world.
So if your peer group doesn't see it as important as you do, and as you said with your answer, Jesse, this could affect where you live, what you do. What do you as youth leaders do to try to engage people who are in your age group to understand this really does matter, this really doesn't affect you, this isn't just some intellectual discussion that I'm involved in? Erica, you started, we can see what you did, but how about with I'm an employment lawyer, and normally I would never say what anyone's age is, but it's relevant for this conversation. So Erica is 30. And how about your peer group? Are they, I mean, you obviously have a wonderful job, but how about your peer group? Do you have to talk them into being interested in this, or are the 30-year-olds all in?
They are not all in. You know, I think we've really approached the climate as, if we only have people understand how terrible everything's going to be, then they'll act. And that hasn't necessarily worked. You know, people are so scared for the future that they can't engage. So it's been really fun for me to be able to talk to all of my friends who are, you know, starting to have babies and worry about the futures of their children, that they don't need to just think of the climate as this huge impossible issue that will plague their children's lives. You know, there are things we can do to make the situation better, and those things don't necessarily have to mean, you know, stopping consuming anything ever, or, you know, never traveling again, or things like that that we think of as huge personal sacrifices that ultimately, you know, make an impact, but not the scale of impact that we need. So people really, I love seeing the sense of relief on people's faces when they hear about climate restoration for the first time.
Okay, so given the challenges that you all have expressed, what do you do to try to get your friends as interested in this as you are, without doing what Erica is suggesting, which is scaring them to death? Or do you think scaring them is the proper way to get them to pay attention? This time I'll start with you, Jesse.
So for the most part, so I'm a part of a group at my school. It's called McDonough Goes Green, that a couple of students and I put together. And overall, the biggest thing that we've tried to do is, you know, start that conversation at my school. For the most part, the community has only seen a little bit of the conversation being had on TV or wherever their news outlets are. So we try and start that conversation and educate the people. And to some extent, that is all it takes, but a good amount of the time, it takes a little bit more than that. It takes more action to get them more passionate about this topic and actually care about this issue. And what we try and do with our group is, you know, do little tasks that we can show them they can make a difference. So for example, we've been doing stream cleans on our campus and around in the community area in Maryland. And it's interesting to see the kids who, they take 3 hours out of the day and they can physically see the change. They can tangibly see that the stream is cleaner, the environment is cleaner, because they've just spent 3 hours picking up a bunch of trash. And we also have done a couple of different movements and protests at our school, along with a teach-in to get more education into our community, into my school's community. We held an Earth Day webinar, things like that. And for the most part, again, it's just the education aspect of it, along with the actual action that we take as a group and try and rally our community around this issue.
How about you, Ashley? What are some of the things that you have done to overcome the challenges, if you said people who are not focused on this in the way you are?
Yeah, so for me, I go to a charter school, so it's a little bit harder for students to implement clubs and regulations, though I've tried to reach out and start a climate club or a club just about global wellness in general. But it's been a little bit hard to do that. So I have to work on a little bit of a smaller scale. And that looked like having conversation, just simple conversations. When I came back from the forum last year, I asked my teacher to let me introduce what I learned from the forum. And like I said, my peers had never heard about restoration. So it was about having a 40-minute class-long conversation about restoration and tactics that we as a younger generation can take in order to help this movement. And then also using social media. Mass media is a great way to get in touch with a lot of people and spread awareness about different global events. And again, like how to do our part in helping the environment.
So go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say, this is so inspiring for me personally, that both Jesse and Ashley are using their own voices, and that they, their administrations in their schools were not doing something, and so they just did it anyway. So, and I think that you're seeing that, across a lot of the sectors that we work in, whether it's national governments around the world or working with local and state governments, that you don't have to wait for leadership, you can be the leadership. So, speaking up and using your voice. I love what Jesse did at his school of just taking control. And Ashley, I'm going to say, maybe embarrass her, but Ashley, when she came to the UN Forum, she held us all. We launched the Foundation for Climate Restoration at the United Nations last September during General Assembly. And, we had a room of 700 people. We had several different speakers talking about the various aspects of climate restoration, from the business aspect, from the climate aspect, from the Vatican aspect, from youth aspect, entertainment aspect, but everyone talking about how women's leadership aspect, how they come to climate restoration. And we had a follow-up meeting the day after. And I have used this, I won't get it exactly right, Ashley, but I have used this quote over and over and over again with leaders all over the world. When Ashley, at the very end of the summit, we said, are there any further comments? And Ashley stood up and she said, I'm speaking for you, Ashley. So Ashley stood up and she said, I came into this thinking that I didn't have a future, or something to that effect. I'm leaving here having a 180 experience, realizing that that I do have a future and that it's in my own hands, loosely translated. But what really stuck with me about that is that, as Erica said, if you give people the opportunity, if you think in terms of one of the things that we did at the forum, is we talked about the fact that Ashley's going to be an international businesswoman. There is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity in climate restoration. There are jobs, there are changes in the way that our food supplies. There is real opportunity here. We had a report that we released with one of our partners back in January that talked about somewhere between $1 to $10 trillion annual opportunity over the next 10 years in this space. So this is, I had another friend at a conference say that in asset classes where you're making your investments, the one to pick, the one that's coming, that's really going to be the asset class, is in carbon removal technology. This is where you want to be as an international business person. So I think that both of them using their voice, that's the most powerful thing, because what we're handing over to them is the future. So thank you both. Great youth advisors.
Carol.
Want to make another point that this is such a difficult time during COVID, where so many people are so overwhelmed, some of them depressed, and you all have such an opportunity to give people a way forward, to be hopeful, to connect the things that they care about to very specific actions. And that's a real tonic for people that feel rudderless and depressed. And so I just want to say that that's such an opportunity that the two of you have, and you can influence, thousands and millions of people to have that same type of commitment and ability to actually make things happen. And I think that's where, there's such a difference between people talking about things, pointing at a problem, and people who know how to mobilize outcomes to a problem. And you can teach your peers how to do that. It's very, very powerful.
So I throw this question open to Jesse or Ashley. Do you think you first have to impress upon your age group, your peers, this is really bad. And here's what's going to happen in your life if we don't do something about it now as youth, before you get them hooked? Or is that so overwhelming and scary that it would make them say, well, it's too big for me, I'm just going to go into some other area that's much more manageable where I feel like it can make more of a difference?
Yeah, sadly, I would say fear can definitely be a really good motivator. So like when I came back from the forum, I did explain to my classmates how poor condition, what a poor condition the earth is in, but it also provides an opportunity for hope to really be emphasized. So when I explain like the bad state of the earth, and then I bring in the hope factor, the restoration factor, it really opens their eyes and lets them know that there is something that we can do about it. So it can, though it may seem like a bad thing, it can definitely be used as a catalyst for hope.
Did you want to add anything, Jesse?
Definitely express similar sentiments. For the most part, it seems like, in some extent, it depends on your audience, whether to go on those two different methods of, exposing people to this issue. I think for the most part, for the people who are, first off, not necessarily educated about this topic, going into it in a more collaborative sense of saying you actually have a voice, you have an ability to change this issue, which can start out by bringing into the actual, I think, let me rephrase that. So for the most part, when you're going into it with a sort of scare them tactic type of thing, that is not necessarily the mission in that statement. You're just giving them the facts pretty much, and the facts are scary. And so I think it's in that point, as Ashley was saying, from that point in time, from you give them the facts, you give them the data points, you give them the reality of the situation, and they can work from that into a feeling of hope and seeing that there are people who are doing something about this, and that they are one of those people who can do something about this in the future.
So it's the hook to say this really matters right now, but then there's the hope for a plan of action as to what to do so that you don't feel, to Carol's point, it's all futile, there's nothing to do, it just adds to my sense of feeling powerless. So here we are this week, it's Earth Week, and let's say you're talking to, many people would have this attitude. Hey, look, I recycle, I don't buy individual plastic water bottles, I take public transportation, assuming it was open, and I'm good. Every week I separate my cardboard from my plastic in the front of my yard, so I'm good, I've done my part. What, am I good? Is that enough? Erica, what do you think?
I think it's a really delicate balance, because I see a lot of people who feel really disempowered about the climate, and doing things like recycling or not buying single-use plastics, they definitely give you a sense of power and control over the situation that can be just so insurmountable feeling. And so I don't want to downplay and say like these things don't matter, but I will say that in terms of getting the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere back to a safe level, they will not do that, right? With the video that Rick showed, we saw that even if we stop all emissions right now, which a lot of that does come from manufacturing things like single-use plastics, even if we stop all of that right now, we still have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we need to introduce a new focus in addition to all of the other important things that we've been working on around the climate and the environment. We also need to look at removing massive quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And the good news is that there are solutions that can do that. The easiest one to describe quickly is there's a process by which you can create limestone, a synthetic limestone, using captured carbon dioxide and calcium, which can come from sources like recycled concrete from buildings that have been demolished. So you can actually create this synthetic rock for use in infrastructure projects that's almost half CO2 by weight. And it's a commercial product. You can sell it and make a profit. So there are things out there that are commercially viable, that are scalable. We use 50 billion tons of concrete per year. So the amount of CO2 that you can store in that concrete is huge. And there are policies that we can put into place. So if we communicate with our elected officials in particular, we can enact regulations that support the implementation and scaling of the solutions that are out there, as well as the research and development of new solutions. So yes, absolutely recycle. And yes, avoid single-use plastics. Do all of the things that we all know are good for the environment. And don't beat your, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Erica.
I was just going to say, don't beat yourself up if you're not always able to do that. And keep in mind the actions that are more leverageable. So things like talking to your city or your county government about putting in regulations that affect their procurement processes. So like, you know, the county does so much construction. If they put in a regulation saying that they need to be getting their concrete from lowest carbon sources, then all of a sudden this whole market opens up to these solutions. So one of the things that we're trying to do at the foundation is really broaden the education about what the solutions are and what power local governments have to impact these things.
So one of the things that we often hear is that procedures to make the environment better, to pick higher quality goods, to not use plastic, et cetera, they're too expensive. And that this is anti-business, it's gonna hurt the consumer, it's gonna make everything cost too much. And that's when I think there's a challenge, because your immediate view is, I have X dollars to spend now. I'd like to be altruistic about what the Earth's going to look like in 40 years, but I have X amount of dollars to spend now. So don't make me feel bad that I'm hurting the world when I just can't afford to buy this healthier product, if you will, because I need to take the one that's less expensive and cheaper. Do any of you experience that in your work, and Ashley and Jesse and Rick and Carol, and when you're trying to talk to people about this? It's just like, I get it, but that's down the road, and right now I got X amount of bucks and I can't afford it.
So can I say one thing before we turn it over? There is one thing that you have that's absolutely free, and that's your voice. The most powerful thing that you can do, Jesse, I suspect that this is your first election coming up this fall, and I mean, I'd love to hear from you how you're thinking about helping your peer group know how important it is that they show up and vote. Left, right, center, however they vote, but that they show up and they use their voice and vote. So I think that's the most powerful thing. You can ask and hold your local official accountable. That we have a campaign that we launched in Santa Clara County in California, in Silicon Valley. It's the first ever climate restoration local government. And what that means is that their city planning, their business, their budgeting, and their procurement now requires them to look at things like carbon negative concrete. There's not a cost difference. There's maybe a 1% premium between the two. Why wouldn't they build all of their municipal buildings in carbon negative concrete? If we did that across multiple cities across the planet, we were removing tons and tons and tons of carbon, still building the buildings that we're going to have anyway, and it would be turning a profit. So I'd love to hear both of you, Jesse, starting with you, talk about how you're thinking about using your voice and getting others to as well in the election season.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Rick. So for the most part, the majority of my friends are 18 or at least turning 18. So this will be, as you have said, their first election or their first big election, I guess. I think that's one of the easiest and biggest ways that you can make an impact as somebody who might be like turned off from somebody saying, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to take these radical steps to change our path towards a greener future, pretty much. And to stem away from that idea of saying you have to take these radical steps, the simplest thing you can do is check a check mark on a box that changes the movement of your county or your city or your state or whatever it is, based on your representatives that you, as a person who has the right to vote, can elect.
Yeah, even though I'm 17, I am approaching voting age. So luckily I was able to participate in the primary elections. And I definitely put on my social media the fact that I voted, and I marketed like my voting sticker. And I think that's a very unique way and very appropriate way to kind of emphasize the importance of voting and being an active citizen. But it's my goal to, by the time the elections later in the year come around, it's my goal to emphasize the importance of researching the candidates. A lot of times citizens just kind of check box, not really knowing what the candidates stand for. But for the elections later in the year, it's a goal of mine to emphasize doing research and preparing for the election so that you can make educated voting measures, and you don't necessarily just check boxes, but to have some research behind it.
So banking off of Erica and Rick's great questions about the role of government and you as youth leaders coming in to have a voice in that, what specific changes do you hope to see in your community in Chicago, Ashley, and in your community in Baltimore, Jesse? Either one of you jump in.
I definitely hope to bring more awareness to the youth generation about climate restoration, more specifically, because it does have that hope factor. A lot of us do, like I said before, know about mitigation and adaptation, but I really want to see more awareness about restoration, because that can bring that hope factor and that motivation and that drive to get more involved in climate restoration. And I think we can do a lot once we reach that point.
Okay, how about you, Jesse?
So for the most part, I guess, at least in the near future, I want to see real change, real movement. We only have 10 years. The point of no return is 2030. And at that point, there's not a lot that we can do to save our planet. And for the most part, I guess I want to see more education about the topic. In my own community, that's what our group has been trying to work with. McDonough Goes Green. Our sort of mission statement, in a sense, was to cultivate a culture of environmental sustainability. So to create a whole community around environmental sustainability, around changing the ways and the methods that we currently use to a more environmentally friendly path towards a greener future. And so for the most part, just a shift in the culture, and something that the group that I'm with has been worked on, McDonough Goes Green has worked on, is our own Green New Deal. Because with the understanding that we are seniors, we have created this movement. We've created a sort of place in our community that we are sort of witnessed, I guess, or we are recognized as a real group, something to be dealt with. And we've created this thing called a Green New Deal, which hopefully will, working with the administration, it's a promise for the class of 2030 to have a couple of different aspects to change in our community, with an environmental coordinator, different waste management policies, and things along those lines to continue on the path to a greener future and make sure that we are not part of the problem, we are part of the solution.
Go ahead, Ashley.
One of the bigger changes that I really hope to see, hopefully in the near future, is that being in Chicago, it's a little bit harder to see the stars at night. And so I hope that sometime in the future that the atmosphere can get clear enough so that I might be able to see the stars. I've always been fascinated by them, but I rarely see them.
That's really powerful.
That's a very powerful sentence, Ashley. Very powerful sentence. Since you're both about to leave your respective high schools and go off to college, how much of this mission will you take with you as freshmen? Tell us about what your plans are to keep this going. Jesse, you want to start?
So of course, I'm in this conversation, I'm in this issue, I'm in this crisis. And so I will definitely continue on in some respect throughout my later days in college. Maybe be part of some other club or some other organization that continues on this path to a greener future. And yeah, I think for the most part, yeah, I think that's mainly, it's just continuing on the same path and making sure that I'm spreading the awareness that I can. And again, with the understanding that I am leaving my high school, we don't want this movement to die. My group doesn't want this movement to die. And so we created that Green New Deal to continue it, to make sure that it continues on and it doesn't leave when we leave, pretty much. It doesn't stop its motion when we leave as seniors. So we've also taken in underclassmen to continue on the movement in my schools community, my high school's community, McDonough.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I go to a new charter high school, and so there's not really too much students can do to implement clubs. But when I go off to college, I definitely want to get involved more into clubs and different organizations, because I'll have the liberation then to really have an impact. And I'm so excited to go like gardening, to clean up around my community, and to help out smaller organizations and even larger organizations, and really get the chance to do my part. Like I've always wanted to do. So I'm super excited about that.
And I just want to add, just real quick, Deborah, to also use your voice and use your influence and get into the office of the president of your university, because those folks and that administration need you all at the table. And that's a big part of what Global Minded does, is get young people, diverse people to the table with people in a hierarchy who are not often engaging at the level to create solutions on that campus with you. So I would just encourage both of you, even this summer, to write your college president, start engaging, get to know the provost and those people, because those are power structures. And when you learn to work with people in positions of power, you can mobilize big outcomes. But you deserve to be able to do that, and then you can get your friends and other people connected to alums and other people who can help you financially launch your ideas. So you kind of want to have a strategy on the ground, and then you want to have a strategy to work with these people in the power structures, because they're going to really mobilize your outcome with you.
That's great advice. Definitely carry that.
Yeah, let me second that. I in my former life, I was chief of staff at a university, and I will tell you that the number one meeting that you take is when the students come to see you in the president's office. And it's also powerful if the students come to see you in numbers and or bring their parents. So if there is an alumni week or something like that, or our parents come to campus or something like that, when you're in administration in the university, the last thing you want is to have the students not happy and have the parents standing behind. It's very important that you use your voice and have your peers and others standing behind you. But that's a really great point, Carol.
So what we're clearly hearing, that there is passion among the youth leaders, and we hope that Ashley and Jesse are representative. And we've been given some great tips. But I want to ask you what will sound like a Debbie Downer question, but so far in what you've done, where have you received the most pushback from the community in terms of your efforts and what you wanted to see happen? You want to start, Ashley?
Yeah, I'd say the most pushback is the financial factor. Is that many of my peers are like kids. They don't necessarily have the finances to go out and change the lifestyle of their household and to invest in new products or more appropriate products. So there's definitely that financial factor that my peers feel like they can't necessarily contribute in that way. And also they feel like they have to go to extreme measures, and for some that they feel like they may have to be vegan, or they have to give up an entirely new different lifestyle. And so like after I came back from the forum, and after I learned more about climate restoration in general, I informed them that you don't have to necessarily take those big factors. It can be smaller things like turning off the lights in your home. It can be like different smaller actions. So at first it was the feeling of you have to take those bigger actions, you have to take those extremes, and do I have the finances to take those extremes? But hopefully I can bring some hope that you can do those smaller actions, and those smaller actions are also important.
So definitely similar idea. There's a lot of students, or a lot of my peers are like the idea that they need to take those radical steps to achieving the change, to continue on that path of, of a greener future. But in reality, that's not necessarily the case, and that isn't a great way of, moving the crowd, moving the people, moving your audience. They need to be with you on this topic. Everybody needs to be with you on this topic. So you need to take the steps in order to make sure those people are with you in relation to this issue. For the most part, within the administration at my school, so the group that I'm involved with, McDonough Goes Green, for the most part, in the beginning, have been able to just work on our own, have relatively full autonomy, whatever we want to do, and whatever we can make happen, they just sort of say, okay, great, you guys make it happen, you have it go down. With that stream cleans or different movements, teach-ins, things like that, if we can make it happen as a students, they're fully on board. And then as the time has gone on, and as we become more recognized as a group, as a club or as an organization type of thing in a way, we've been able to see the administration start to work with us. So there is a faculty group on my campus, on McDonough's campus, who have the same ideas of us, and we are able to work with them to, creating the Green New Deal, as we're calling it, to again, hopefully achieve that greener future, to stay on that path towards a greener future.
So you're both you will be college freshmen in the fall. Do you think that the selection of your major will affect your ability to have a voice in this issue on your respective campuses?
For the most part, I would probably assume no, not really. I'm a high school student, and it seems like college, I'll just have a more defined route of exploration in terms of education. But for students who maybe are this type of major, I'd say one aspect of it is it doesn't really matter what you are or what major you're pursuing, because on the outside, you can always continue that pursuit of the greener future type of thing. And then in a different respect, whatever major you choose, it's going to be affected by climate change, undoubtedly so. For the most part, across many of the majors that you see around in the colleges, it's going to have some aspect of it that can be affected by climate change, whether that's business or whatever it is, really. So I think it's an issue that's so big and so prevalent and so necessary that we need to, anecdote this issue, anecdote this solution, I guess. For the most part, it seems like, I don't know, again, it will affect everybody, and it will affect everybody's major in some way or another.
So Kelly, can I pick up on that just 1 second? And just say, I know we're getting closer and closer on time, but something that really strikes me as you and I are the two older people on this webinar. But if you think in terms of Ashley and Jesse are in 10 years will be younger than Erica. So a little more than 10 years ago, there was no such thing as an iPhone. So if you think in terms of what we're able to do over the next 10 years, when Ashley is an international businesswoman, in 10 years from now, if we do all the work that we're doing and they use their voices and we do our work and we continue to connect investors and solutions and find things like carbon negative concrete and methane removing cow feed and all kinds of different solutions, imagine where we can be 10 years from now.
This is clearly restoration, which is what we're focused on, is clearly an opportunity in the future for you, the leaders, to do well and to do good. And that those would go hand in hand is fantastic. But we've been talking about youth, which is, of course, the subject of this webinar. However, we, the older generation of polluters, shouldn't be thrusting all this upon you to fix. And actually, there are people who are older who also really care about this issue. So if you've hooked me, the three of you have hooked me, and Rick and Carol, and I care about this now, help give some advice for how youth should work with older people together, because maybe we have some of the resources that Ashley was saying no one would expect a 17-year-old to have. So what would you do concretely to make us join you in caring? Give me some action that I could take to do the right thing to help in restoration and follow the passions that you have. That wasn't intended as a stump the stars question.
I can chime in really quickly.
Okay.
I know that for young people, often the path to the decision makers is often not clear. So as much as young people often know what the right thing to do is, they might not know exactly how to get there. So providing those pathways and opening up your networks to young people who are driven to make the difference can definitely be helpful.
Okay, Ashley or Jesse, you have a way to get my friends energized the way you are so we can all help one another?
Mm-hmm. So from what I've seen, from my own experience or what I've seen on the news, one of the biggest things I can say is don't go into the conversation with, I guess, a going after somebody mindset. this issue from, it seems like it's been a little bit politicized, you're either on this side or the other, when in reality, everybody needs to be on not one side, but everybody needs to be together in a sense. And so with that, youth versus adults, it's just starting the conversation in a healthy manner and making sure that they are open to the conversation when you go into the discussion.
Does your, I know we're getting short on time. So as consumers, Jesse and Ashley, does your commitment to climate restoration affect your choices? Does it affect did it affect your choices? Or I know Ashley's still choosing between two schools as to what college you went to. Is this something you would look into to see, am I going to university, which really doesn't even have a recycling program, never mind a commitment to all of this, or the clothes you buy, or the places you travel, or the states that you would give your income to if you went there for a vacation? How much does this carry through the choices that you have and will make going forward?
I think it has impacted a lot of my decisions, specifically about college. Like, I am definitely looking into business programs and international business programs so that I can have the background and education in order to make an effective and significant change and impact. And then it's also like impacted my smaller decisions on whether like I buy plastic products or if I go for a more convenient